Well, they say the third time is a charm. Maybe the fourth time will be a little more charming, as we've started and stopped several times this morning trying to get this to work. I do understand that Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood had their in-home concert on Facebook Live, and it crashed because too many people were getting on to hear the concert. I'm just going to assume that's what happened this morning. We are learning as we go and messing up as we go, like we knew we would. If you're tuning back in after having sat through half of this morning's lesson, I'm very appreciative of it. Before we get into the lesson, we do need to remind people of some people in need this week. If you have not received a prayer list, do remember Peggy Sellers and her family, Donna Goss and the family. Peggy's sister, Mary Hendricks, passed away last Wednesday. They had a small service last Saturday for 10 people, as the rules give. But pray for them. Give their sympathies to their family. Continue to remember Mary Davis, Cece's mother, who is recovering from a stroke and surgery on her brain, and having some difficult days. Be with them. Be with Miss Peggy Sellers as she recovers from a surgery. Doyle Mosley, Bridget Arundel, John Brooks, Bonnie Rustler, Bexley Nash, and Chandler Ross, Peggy Burks, all battling cancer, taking chemotherapy. Be with them and give your prayers and attention to them. We do know that Bexley Nash was hoping to have surgery over the next week or two to remove the tumor that is sufficiently shrunk now. Pray for her that her blood counts will be good and that sort of thing so she can have the surgery. Be praying for Miss Lizzie Mae Baugh, who had, with her back situation, she's still struggling with, and her back, some cracked vertebra in her back, and the pain and discomfort of that, and the struggle she has resting. But remember her in another reason too. On Thursday, Miss Lizzie Mae turns 100 years old. That's quite an accomplishment. Let's make the postman have to work doubly hard to carrying all the cards and letters and well wishes from all of us. Make the phone ring off the wall. Let her know that we are particularly attentive to her on her 100th birthday. We are in week 3 of the community shutdown now, and starting to feel our stride a little bit, and starting to get a little cabin fever after all of it. But there's nothing like a national crisis to bring out the best of people, make them pull together and work hard together. I talked to one lady that she said she had just about had enough. She was pulling the blinds, shutting it out. She was not watching the news. She was just going to sit it out now until it was all over. And I said something about coronavirus being bad. She said, no, she wasn't talking about coronavirus. She was talking about the election and politics. And I think we all know what she means. It just seems to wear on and on and on. And we struggle to pay attention even because it does get so negative and so nasty. The coronavirus, as much bad news as it brings and the nastiness that it has, it doesn't seem to be able to touch election year politics. If you're a parent, you know the feeling as you listen to the newscast. You remember when you're going down the road and something happens in the seat behind you and you turn around and you say, "Who did it?" And they all look at you, point fingers. That's the response that you get. As everybody seems to be wanting to blame somebody else. Whose fault is it? Whose fault is it that we have this coronavirus? It must be the Democrats. Whose fault is it that we have community shut down? It must be the Republicans. Whose fault is it? And everybody's pointing fingers at somebody else, trying to figure out some way that it's somebody else to blame. Somebody obviously must be doing it. And there's some reason to reject those people, because obviously if they weren't doing what they are doing, then everything would be good. Lots of skeet shooting going on. Somebody has an idea. Somebody else pulls out a shotgun, shoots it down. Somebody else says something else they think about, and somebody else pulls out a shotgun and shoots it down. What's really sad is such conduct has not been relegated to politics through the years. Sometimes, and oftentimes, the church has felt that kind of conduct wash through its ranks as well. It seems it's always hanging around in church, somebody who is using religion to look down their nose at somebody else. C.S. Lewis wrote a famous essay called The Inner Circle, and he commented about it on several occasions, about this feeling of pride of being in the right group, and being one who has arrived and somebody who has it all together, of being good and being righteous, and obviously above all those other people who aren't. It's all those other people who are so much less. The Jews nationally in Jesus' day struggled with this. They struggled with these feelings of elitist position in the world. And amongst the Jews, the Pharisees in particular, really had a problem. The Pharisees were born out of this idea that all the rest of the Jewish nation was giving in a little too much to the Greeks and the Romans, and their culture was changing, and the Pharisees were the only group that were standing firm and standing strong and standing for what was right, while everybody else was falling away, going into apostasy. They were the only ones. They were the inner circle, not like all those other people. Perhaps that's why Jesus says what he says in Matthew chapter 7. It is interesting, in this sermon that has covered some very big subjects: real righteousness, real worship, the real kind of character that brings blessing. How do you handle the insecurities of the world? So these big subjects. Now he turns his attention to something that a lot of people might consider a lot smaller, but evidently Jesus thought it was a big deal, particularly for the crowd that he was talking to. Here's what he writes. Matthew 7:1. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Now, certainly you have recently heard someone say, don't judge. It's become like the Monopoly get-out-of-jail-free card. If you're doing something and somebody criticizes it and says, you shouldn't do that, don't judge. Somebody does something and somebody says they're wrong. Somebody says that that's not right. And they say, well, you shouldn't judge. Jesus said, don't judge. Is that what Jesus meant? Did Jesus say that we shouldn't be correcting any behavior, or that we shouldn't look at any behavior and say that's wrong or that's right? Well, it's obviously not what Jesus meant, because Jesus says in John chapter 12 that he came into the world not to judge the world. That he was here and he didn't come as a judge. And yet Jesus did a lot of correcting. Jesus called upon people to put things right and to get right. So obviously that's not what Jesus meant. So what is the difference between correcting and judging? What is it that Jesus meant when he says, don't judge? Well, if we look at the comments that followed after it, maybe we can get an idea of what he meant and what the difference is between correcting and judging. And the first one we've already read. He says, with the measure you judge, you shall be judged. Whatever measure you use, whatever the basis is that you judge, are you willing to be judged on that same basis? See, the truth of the matter is, a lot of times we don't know the basis for which we're judging, or we haven't even given it any thought. We just find somebody that we don't like, or that other people say we're supposed to reject. You're not supposed to listen to them. You're not supposed to be like that. You're not supposed to be in that group or this group, and we've already judged them. Before they've ever spoken, before they've ever done anything, we've already decided that we're going to reject them. We don't have a basis. We just reject them now and we'll find a reason later. Jesus says, figure out the basis for which you're judging, because the basis you use for judging others is the basis you're going to be judged by. Are you willing to use the same reasons for God to reject you as you are using to reject somebody else? Upon what basis you judge, you shall be judged. Secondly, he says, verse 3, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Before you correct, before you say something about somebody else's behavior, Jesus says you need to do some self-inspection. You need to look inside. See, the truth is, most criticism, most rejection is a whole lot more about the critic than it is about the one being criticized. Once again, most of the time, the criticism started long before the person spoke. The criticism started long before the person acted. That the person doing the criticizing had already decided. When the person started saying something, the person that is hearing it has already decided whether they're going to agree or disagree before they even hear what the person has to say. You see, the criticism is coming from within them more than it is from the that is being judged. The criticism is coming from within them more than is coming from the good or the evil there. Jesus says, look inside yourself. Make sure your heart's right. Make sure you're not overlooking your own sins. Robert Wicker, as we were talking about this lesson earlier in the week, mentioned something that I thought was very helpful. At Wicker Machine, as they cut up metal pieces and things, every once in a while somebody will get a piece of metal in their eye. Robert said it is very excruciating, very painful, and you have to get it out. But you can't really get it out yourself. You need somebody to help you. Who do you turn to help you get a piece of metal out of your eye? And he said you can imagine looking over in somebody's face that close, trying to get a little small speck of metal out of your eye. What kind of person do you trust to do that? He said you don't just trust anybody. As a matter of fact, it takes a very close relationship to let anybody do that. Even with all that pain, you're only going to let the person who you can really trust, somebody that's really close to you, do it. Who do you trust to be gentle? Jesus says before you get ready to criticize somebody, before you get ready to correct somebody, you need to look in your own heart. You'll be more gentle when you understand your own sins. So be humble and reflect and understand your own heart. Deal with your own sins first. Then you'll be in a position to correct somebody else. Which brings us to the third thing. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. Now, in our time, in our society, that statement has a very negative connotation. I don't think Jesus had that negative connotation when he said it. All he's saying is, don't correct somebody before they're ready. Don't correct somebody before their heart is prepared to receive it. If they're not ready to receive the correction, not ready to receive the judgment, then you just keep it to yourself. Wait till the time is right. Wait till the time is ready. See, it's easy to give correction and judgment because we want to give it. Because we're the one that wants to get it off our mind. Give them a piece of our mind to it's like a competition. It's like somehow that we have to get things right with ourselves, to unload. Jesus says that's not the time to give correction. Give correction when they're ready to receive it, when their heart's right, and when their heart's open. And that's why you go to the next thing he says is, ask and it will be given unto you, seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be opened unto you. See, that's a different attitude. That's a different posture. That's a different demeanor going to somebody. Rather than kicking the door down and trying to force them into realizing that what you say is true and that they need to accept it and they need to change and all of that, you wait till the time is ready and you keep asking and you keep seeking and you keep knocking, and then the door hopefully one day will be open. And you can say it and they'll receive it. That's the way the Father is. That's the way the Father is, the text says. You need to be praying. You need to be praying that He will open those doors. You don't go to the Father and make demands. You go to the Father and you ask and you seek and you knock and you wait. That's the way you do with each other. That's the way correction is done. And then he comes to that last rule about it, the one that seems to always cover everything when it comes to how we relate to one another. How do you treat the other person? How do you correct somebody else? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In the areas of your life in which you're wrong and you're doing things wrong, how do you want to receive correction? What kind of person do you want to receive it from? What is it that you would want? Jesus says, whatever it is you would want, now go do that to others. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Be the kind of person that you would want to give you correction. That's the kind of person you need to be. When you begin to look at that, you begin to see a lot of difference between judgment and correction. Judgment has to do with, it's over. This is the sentence. Face it. Correction is the gentle nudging, hoping that they'll come back to righteousness and hope to what's best. Correction understands that what's inside me makes all the difference, even as I address what's inside them. Correction understands that my relationship to them is of perennial importance if I'm going to address something in somebody else's life. Correction is a whole lot more about the other person and wanting what's best for them than it is letting go of what's inside of me. When I look at Jesus' life, one of the things that's amazing to me is that he always found basis for accepting other people. Whatever the other person was into, whatever the person was doing, whoever the other person was, Jesus would find a basis for accepting those people. He could always find something. He could always find some reason to accept them rather than reject them. I would say that Jesus gave them the benefit of the doubt, but that's not really true. Because he didn't have any doubts. He understood. But maybe that's exactly it. If we knew the whole story, we would understand each other better. And perhaps one of the keys to accepting one another is to understand the story of the other person, number one. And number two, when we see them doing something that we're uncomfortable with, that we assume we don't know the whole story or we'd understand it better. Whatever it is, we need to be gentle and we need to be tender. And when we have to apply correction, when we have to give correction, we need it to be in an effort to bring the person back to goodness and wholeness, not as a way of cutting them off, not as a way of passing sentence. In the kingdom of heaven, he says, we live with each other and we help each other. But we do it in a way that is gentle and tender and as servants to one another. Let's pray. Father in heaven, sin bothers us. It bothers us in ourselves, and it bothers us in the world around us. And we don't know, Father, sometimes how quite to handle that. Help us to be mindful of our own failings. And because we're mindful of our own failings, help us to be gentle in the way that we treat others. And because we see how gracious you are at accepting us, help us to be gracious in accepting others. May that move us to be like Jesus. And we pray all these things in His name. Amen.
As I went down in the river to pray, studying